So imagine you have a girlfriend. Now I know that's quite the creative endeavor for some of you, but I'm going somewhere with this. Now imagine that she has a great sense of humor and that she is not bothered at all by your most annoying personality traits, and that in turn, the things that most people find annoying about her are things that you're not bothered with in the least. Imagine that she takes genuine interest in your work and the things you do in your free time, and that you also find her job and her hobbies to be fascinating. And, on top of that, her family loves you and you love hers. She's also adventurous and tender in just the right measure when it's time to get to the, steamy bits. But there is this one little thing she does that you're not all that crazy about. Every once in a while, when you least expect it, boom, she smacks your balls with all her strength and then laughs at you. And all you can do is wallow in pain and ask, why? If you can put this picture together, maybe you'll get an idea about how I feel about Divinity Original Sin II. Welcome to Ye Olde Entertainment. My name is Alex, and as you know, it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumbing for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today we reach the end of our road to Baldur's Gate 3. It has been a very long journey, one that I have thoroughly enjoyed, but one that I can't quite consider done until we take a deep dive into a game that quite a few of you consider to be Larian Studios' magnum opus, Divinity Original Sin II. You know, at this point in my videos, I generally ask a rhetorical question along the lines of, is this the best modern-day classic RPG, or is it one more title in the long list of decent but ultimately unimpressive CRPGs that have tried to bring back the glory days of games like Baldur's Gate 2 and Icewind Dale? Well, I guess I did throw that question in there, didn't I? But no, I have a better one for you this time, and it's this. If it had been your decision, would you have granted Larian Studios the license to Baldur's Gate 3 after playing Divinity Original Sin 2? I'd love to hear your answers in the comment section down below, and while you're at it, know that you would be doing me a solid if you click that big bright red subscribe button. As for me, well, you know that I rate games according to a system of categories that feels relevant to the genre of the game at hand. And this time we have Divinity Original Sin 2 on our hands, which is a medieval fantasy classic RPG with turn-based combat mechanics. And when it comes to those, character creation and character progression are up first. While there are games like Baldur's Gate 2, in which you're provided with a broad array of classes, races, skills, and whatnot, with which to create your character however you wish, there are others like The Witcher, in which you play Geralt of Rivia, someone who has his own personality, someone who has a past, friends, foes, and even goals. Yes, there are many decisions you can make pertaining his talents, techniques, and gear, and you can even somewhat steer the wheel of his personality one way or another, but the game never entirely puts you in the driver's seat. And then there's games like Dragon Age Origins that provide you with 6 different origin stories that depend on your choice of race and class, but even this one ultimately stamps the label of Warden on your forehead regardless of who you choose to be in the world, which makes a human noble not too different from a dwarf commoner. Well, one thing that I can definitely appreciate in Divinity Original Sin 2 is that regardless of which is your preferred approach to character creation, this game's got you covered. If you prefer the Geralt of Rivia approach, there's 6 different characters for you to choose from, each of whom have their own personalities, appearance, voice acting, and overarching missions. These aren't generic companions, and there's even dialogue lines that are unique to each of them, and they are very much consistent with their personalities. Lohse, for example, is a jester, and she can come up with some rather inadequately funny responses in serious or dangerous situations, but that's Lohse. While Ifan has some 90s action flick one-liners to dish out every now and then. But if you don't like the Geralt of Rivia approach, or if you're not crazy about any of the 6 characters, you can always create your own character. You can choose your gender, your race, whether you're alive or an eternal, I suppose, and also a quote-unquote class. The game doesn't really use a class system, so choosing to be, let's say, a cleric only means that you'll have certain skills and not others. The good news is that you can fiddle around with almost everything. If you don't like your class's initial skills, you can change them for different ones. You can also change some of your attributes and also your initial talents, which work a bit like your perks in Fallout. You can also choose some standard fare superficial appearance attributes and, curiously enough, your dominating musical instrument. strange, but I can appreciate when devs try to do something different, so okay, I guess. Also, the instrument of your choice does sound higher in the mix, so that's a cool thing, I guess. I do have a couple of nitpicks at this point. First, like I said, the game kind of sells you that it uses a class system. And while this can simplify things during your character creation process, it can be misleading and a little bit confusing. I think it would have been better if they had presented the player with all the combat skills and a few selectable initial skills. After all, it's combat abilities, what you increase every time you level, not any class. The trick to your build in Divinity Original Sin 2 is to figure out which role you want each of your characters to play in the party, and then boost the attribute on which the combat skills that you're interested in are based on, and then learn the skills of your choice. For example, you can choose to boost Los's intellect every time you level, if you want to focus on her Hydrosophist and Aerothurge combat abilities. But if you do that, she might not be able to do much in the way of physical damage. If you don't want to neglect this type of damage on Losa, you could look for spells from other combat abilities that do not require you to put too many points into those other schools and that also scale with intellect. Mosquito Swarm and Infect from the Necromancy school are both excellent candidates. They do physical damage, they both scale with intellect, and they do not require you to invest too many points into Necromancy. Also, chances are that you're going to want to look into spells that give you a tactical edge, and those may not be part of your preferred combat ability. So no, classes aren't a thing in Divinity Original Sin 2, and they should have not even been mentioned. My other nitpick has to do with your available companions and their initial class. You first get this guy, and maybe you'll browse all the classes available while you got him selected, but then you switch to other races and maybe even to your pre-made heroes. The problem with this is that the last class you selected stays selected. This is not too serious, but lore-wise, Los is meant to be an enchantress, Beast is meant to be a battle mage, and Sibyl, for example, is meant to be a scoundrel. But if you have never played the game before, you have no way of knowing this. I think that when you're navigating through your 6 pre-made heroes in the character creation screen, their class should have reset to their preferred class. And yes, I know this is being tremendously nitpicky, but I really have nothing else negative to say. I think that leveling design is simply brilliant in Divinity Original Sin 2. Having combat abilities provides you with paths that are filled with potential synergies, but allowing you to acquire spells from any discipline, as long as you have the minimum required level, gives you all the tactical flexibility in the world, and I love it. You also have social skills and perks, and I felt like they were all useful. Talking to animals, for example, reveals a ton of clues. Being persuasive helps you circumvent a truckload of fights. And in this game, this is something that you very much want to do, because convincing people gives you experience and preserves allies. And my absolutelyest favoritist thing in this game, your combat skills can also be used in other ways. For example, tactical retreat and teleport allow you to explore places and avoid fights. This is like Icewind Dale II in freaking steroids. I think Larian nailed this aspect of the game. They knew what they wanted to achieve with the character creation and character progression design, and in my opinion, they realized its potential to the fullest. Gameplay. Gameplay in Divinity Original Sin 2 consists of combat, exploration, questing, and puzzle solving. And let's do combat first. Listen, I know that some of you aren't fans of turn-based combat, but this is quite simply the best turn-based combat there is. Hands down, no questions asked. It really doesn't get any better than this in my experience. And hey, this is coming from someone who loved the combat in Baldur's Gate 2 and the Icewind Dale series, and in new games like Pathfinder, Kingmaker, and Pillars of Eternity, but this is just in a tactical league of its own. And this is why. On a very basic level, you have surfaces that you can electrify or set on fire or freeze. You have irregular terrains that you may use to your advantage, spells that alter the flow of battle beyond your typical spell protections. There's swapping characters, teleporting, finding vantage points, etc. That is all pretty impressive stuff on its own, but you can also chain or unchain your party members, and this allows for some delightfully awesome tactics. For example, you can have a couple of party members lure all the enemies out of their vantage points and trenches into a choking point, while you can have another party member sneak around the entire location, climb up to the vantage point where minutes ago there was an enemy, and flank their butts to hell. You can make some party members wait and only have them intervene when you need them or when you know what you want them to do in the fight. There's endless possibilities, and it's Divinity Original Sin 2's absolutely masterful level design what makes the difference here. Skills are also varied, diverse, and tactically interesting. Just look at this. Hatlosa used Teleport to bring a bad guy within striking range of Decaying Touch. Used Decaying Touch to eliminate its physical armor. Targets affected by decay get hurt instead of healed when a healing spell is used on them, so I used Losa's healing spell to finish him off. Yes, that's the kind of stuff you can do in Divinity Original Sin 2. Exploration is also head and shoulders above most other experiences you're likely to find out there in the genre. Every act offers a huge, and I do mean huge, map that's filled with all sorts of diverse geological formations, ruins, buildings, you name it. It's easy to get lost here, and if that's a thing you don't like, you might actually have a bit of a hard time. For me, the level design not only added great possibilities combat-wise, but it also instilled a feeling of adventure to the experience, and it's not like it doesn't have its share of hand-holding with all those quest markers. In my opinion, we could have done without them, but I'm probably alone in this. One of the best things about exploration is that you can navigate the entire map with your arrow keys to get a better sense of your present location and your surroundings, but also of those places that are terribly hard to access. Those pesky little places you definitely have to go to because there must be some sweet-ass loot waiting for you. And the good thing is that there almost always is. Ah, the feeling the first time I used my combat skills to get to one of those remote places and found a ruby there. Questing in Divinity Original Sin 2 is not designed in a way that feels fetch questy, and is almost always at least somewhat relevant to your main mission. There's a nice blend of high-stake adventures, moments of levity, and side activities like testing your mettle at the arena. But while the questing aspect never felt boring, I also felt like your adventure could have been more streamlined, leaner if you would. We will talk more about that later, but for now I'll just say that if the story had been leaner, it would have been more impactful. Icewind Dale II and Baldur's Gate 2 come to mind as good examples here. The bottom line here is that questing is well designed and for the most part well paced. The writing is not top tier stuff, but it's still way better than merely serviceable. Divinity Original Sin 2 also features puzzle solving. And there's two ways in which this is integrated into the gameplay, one that works really well for me and one that I really didn't like at all. During the first two acts there are what I like to call puzzly fights, and also stuff that you have to figure out by talking to animals or doing certain things like healing someone before talking to him. These are the puzzles that I like. They are so seamlessly integrated into the experience that they barely even count as puzzles. But then there's the puzzles. And not only are they not great, but they are also very poorly distributed in the game, like atrociously so. We've mentioned before in this channel that any form of entertainment that tells a story has plot points, and there's always one of those that's crucial, one that marks the beginning of the final stretch. And that final stretch should be all about the rising action, that straight shot to the climax. Once you reach that point, well, everything else that you might have been doing up until that point that's not related to the main quest should cease to matter. There should be no distractions, no bullshit in a word. And you know what very much counts as bullshit in a final stretch? Puzzles. Bard's Tales 4 is a game that is almost 50% combat and 50% puzzle solving. And what made the final stretch of that game boring and forgettable was the fact that after you hit that plot point that marks the beginning of the final stretch, the feeling of urgency is completely lost because you have to spend several minutes pushing some boulders about to figure out some bullshit combination. No guys, this is not how you do it. Even if your game is meant to be 50% combat and 50% puzzle solving by design, you have to have the sense to fucking break that rule in the final stretch in the name of high stakes and adventure. You know who else didn't have the sense to deal with this appropriately? The folk at Larian Studios, unfortunately. I felt like 70% of the puzzles were placed in the final act of the game, just as you were getting ready for the final push. No. And as it happened with Bard's Tales 4, they almost completely sucked the momentum out of the story and the fun out of the game. Plus the puzzles weren't even fun to solve to begin with. The way I see it, this is one aspect of the game we could have done without, or at the very least, puzzles could have been distributed better. Yes, this is your ball-punching girlfriend having a go at your sack. I know I left the worst for last, But make no mistake about it, I have been playing RPGs for decades, and I'm often in the camp of those old-timers who have convinced themselves there simply won't ever be a game as good as such and such. But the truth is that Divinity Original Sin 2 just takes every relevant aspect of gaming you expect to find in a classic RPG and takes it to the next level. I'm not exaggerating here. Even as stubborn and as comfortably stuck as I am with games like Baldur's Gate 2 and Arcanum, I was very impressed with this title, and gameplay-wise, it instantly became one of my favorites. Story and lore. I'll give you a spoilery, quick version first. You have big bad ugly monsters who are beginning to manifest in the world of Rivellon, where this whole deal takes place, by the way. These monsters want to kill everyone, and by everyone I mean everyone, mortal and gods alike. Speaking of gods, there are 7 of them, each of whom represent one of the mortal races of Rivellon. So in order to prevent these monsters, who are known as Voidwoken, from manifesting into the world and killing everyone, the gods have appointed mortal champions, beings known as Godwoken, and that's where you come in. But it turns out that the 7 gods were really members of a race called Eternals, the original inhabitants of Rivellon. So these 7 individuals who are now worshipped as gods started their godly careers by betraying every other Eternal who lived around their time and banishing them to a place known as the Void. They then created the mortal races of Rivellon in order to use them as life energy sources, and this energy is known as Source. As you might imagine, those who were banished to the Void later became the Voidwoken. The only thing keeping these monsters at bay is the Veil, a barrier of sorts who separates this world from the Void. Up until this point, the Veil has been kept in place through the will, effort, and power of a super powerful being known as Lucian the Divine, a human whom the 7 gods of Rivellon had given up a portion of their collective source power to so that he could keep the Veil. So on the surface, this is not a bad foundation for a story. Actually, it's pretty darn solid. The bad guys have a solid motivation to come into this world. The good guys have very good reasons to do what they are doing. Both sides have obstacles they need to overcome. Nothing seems too plot convenient or fortuitous, and there's a good quota of mystery to keep things interesting. But like the philosopher Avril Lavigne once said, so complicated. I mean, I know this is a long game, a very long game, but so are many others. And they are not cluttered with so many characters and so many intermediate steps and mostly pointless adventures, most of which could have been left out. There's Alexander, Dallas, Brachus Rex, Lucian, Eterna, Wendigo, Malady, Gareth, the Saloman, Linderkim, and those are just the ones I remember off the top of my head. And it's not like these characters are just there to do their thing and that's it. No, most of them linger for almost the entire game. It's like the writers were so enamored with their characters that they didn't want to let them go. I also think the game is a little bit stuffed with quests that add nothing relevant to the plot. If there had been less quests, and instead there had been lengthier journeys with more unexpected turns of events, like your return from the sanatorium in Baldur's Gate 2 for example, I think the story would have been easier to follow and I perhaps wouldn't have occasionally lost my interest. And yes, this happened a couple of times. The worst offender for me is the fact that there are only a couple of truly impactful decisions to be made throughout the entire game. I mean, you can pretty much reload a couple of times before taking that final decision and see every ending there is, at least the important bits. But there are people out there who have labeled this story as cheesy and the writing as poor, and it isn't. It's got solid foundations and it's decently put together. Listen, I can understand you not liking the tone or the way in which dialogue lines are written, but that's not to be confused with a bad story. I can even understand if you don't like certain descriptions of certain gestures and actions.
Her eyes are focused on a lizard some distance away.
And consider them to be fan-fiction-y. You'd be wrong. These descriptions are not a fan-fiction exclusive thing, nor are they bad writing per se. But that's neither here nor there. I can best describe the story in Divinity Original Sin 2 as a wasted opportunity. There were some excellent ideas thrown into that stew, but they were just overly cooked and overly spiced, and not always properly. But it's definitely way more than merely serviceable though. Companions lore-wise, they are hit and miss. Some of them I like a lot, and some not at all. But I suspect there's a likable character for everyone. I, for example, hated Sibyl to no end. Even had her killed in my last playthrough, but I can imagine there are quite a few of you who like her. Your companions have some truly amazing stories and missions, some of which are even related to the main story and its characters, like Aefon's. They run into old friends, fans, old love interests, enemies, etc. My favorite thing about them is that you can let them take the wheel at any given time, and they often have unique actions and dialogue lines. At the beginning of the game, you can even choose to be one of them. And to be fair, I do recommend that you play at least one time as either Aefon's or Lohse. For me, Divinity Original Sin II might not be quite up to par with Dragon Age Origins, for example, but it stands head and shoulders above some of its modern-day peers like Pathfinder Kingmaker. Companions gameplay-wise. In our previous video, we mentioned that party-based RPGs can go one of two ways. You can either allow the players to create their entire party however they wish, providing them with a broad array of classes, races, skills, and whatnot, or you can have them meet companions along the way, and then let them decide which are the ones that best suit their playstyle. I don't know about you guys, but it has often happened to me that those companions I like the most gameplay-wise are also the ones I like the least as people. Man, I hate that. But this time Larian Studios has provided you with a cheap little trick to make sure everyone's 100% to your liking. Every time you recruit a companion, it asks you the kind of tactic he should go for. The Red Prince, for example, states that he prefers sword and shield play, but he's also acquainted with magic and subterfuge.
As a born fighter, I prefer the perfection of the blade myself, but I'm well acquainted with the secrets of magic and, yes, even subterfuge.
Well, that's awfully convenient, isn't it? The result is practical though, and it helps you build your party however you wish. And even if that doesn't come out as you expect,
speak to me if you're looking for hired help.
You can always recruit mercenaries and shape them up to be whatever your party needs. Bottom line is, you just can't go wrong with companions gameplay-wise in Divinity Original Sin 2. I still think that the fact that they ask you what you want them to be their fighting style like is a little too cheap, but it's all in the name of a good cause. Secondary mechanics. And there it is, that's the punch in the balls right there. This is what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. Secondary mechanics in Divinity Original Sin 2 are some of the worst. No, actually, they are the worst I have ever experienced. Hell, I'm having a hard time deciding where to start. So let's start with buying and selling. So there's a skill called bartering, and because of that, buying and selling is the smelliest, ugliest piece of turd I have ever seen in a game. So you bring up the trade window. Let's say you want to sell this ring. So you hover your cursor over the item to see if it's any better than the piece you're wearing. Fine, you can see the comparison there, but are you sure it's not actually better than the rings your other companions are wearing? Well, not only is there no way to compare it there and then, but you can't even drag and drop that item to a different companion and then switch over to them to see if it's actually better than what they are wearing. What the fuck? You can't even switch to your other companions while there's items pending trade because bartering. Fuck you, game. So you have to exit the trade interface, move around items to compare them to what your characters are wearing, give all the stuff you want to sell to your bartering specialist, and then bring up the trade window. And make sure you ask for money for your goods, because unless you click on the balance icon, you'll be giving away your stuff for free. Yes, that's a thing that can happen. Why can you even do this? Oh, because you can gain influence by giving stuff away. Why would you want to influence? I don't know, for some crap mechanic that shouldn't even have existed in the first place. Fuck you, game. Just compare this to Pillars of Eternity 2 system. You can see everyone's gear when you're trading. You can buy, sell, or compare anything at any given time. There is no bartering skill here that I remember, but if there were, implementing it should be as simple as making the price you have to pay for stuff change depending on which character you have selected. It should be that simple. Also, every time you defeat a boss, you're offered a selection of items from which you should choose only one. But you can only compare the items being offered to what your currently selected character is wearing. Why? Why can't you simply switch characters and see if any of the items being offered are any better than your current gear? Also, you can craft stuff, like food, scrolls, and gear. Just hover your cursor over the recipe and receive absolutely no information about what it does. Well, fuck you too, game. I must confess, I almost dumped this smart, ambitious, and caring girlfriend because her ball punching became almost unbearable. Sound effects and mix.
woke up this morning in a sweat. Can't get that thing out of my mind.
I love the sound design in this one. Sounds are all amazing and they pack all the oomph a title like this needs. But for me, it's the mix that steals the show here. As I've said before, you can do all manner of things in combat. And that includes moving characters well away from the fray of battle and have them ambush the enemy party by sneaking around their backs, or climbing cliffs to take advantage of vantage points, etc. And the sound mix takes all of this into account. If you switch to a character who's behind a wall or several rooms away, combat will indeed sound like it's coming from a different room or from further away. And this goodness is not limited only to combat. Walking about a square or a plaza, you can hear all manner of sounds, from merchants gossiping to dogs playing to seagulls. Locations are alive and busy. It truly is one of the best Sonic experiences I've had in a game with an isoparametric perspective. Voice acting.
Bloody goddamn spit-sucking weasel! This is bad. Not just for me and mine. Not just for you and yours. This is bad. For everyone.
Oh, yeah. It was a shipwreck, all right. Not much more to say about it, I guess. Papa Joris used to tell me, "Losa," he'd say. "Losa, you ever find yourself in a sinking ship, follow the rats. They'll find you a way out."
This game has an insane amount of characters, and all of them are voiced, and well, none of them really suck. And that's quite remarkable. Even in games that have much fewer characters, there's always a stinker or two. I didn't think this was the case in Divinity Original Sin II. This is of course not to be confused with the quality of the dialogue lines. Not everyone has great dialogue lines in Divinity Original Sin II. Some characters are a little too on the nose, others are inconsistent, but none are poorly voiced. I suppose a case could be made for characters like Brachus Rex, but it's a matter of taste. But you can tell that professional actors were used and that professional voice direction was at work here. This is not my favorite game in this department, but I also don't have any real complaints. Well, aside from the talking animals, those are bad. Music. I'm a little bit on the fence about this one. It does feature all the orchestral artillery you expect from a title like this, and there's an adequate medieval vibe to it. But all the magic that I've been oh-boying and oh-wowing about on our Road to Baldur's Gate 3 series seems to be, I don't know, absent from this one. I don't think this is in the same league as the score in Icewind Dale or Icewind Dale II or Siege of Dragonspear. It's definitely not bad, just kinda okay compared to the other games in this series. Graphics. Graphics are phenomenal in this title. Locations feel alive, busy, lived in. Outdoors are huge and filled with landmarks and diverse geological formations. Cities are big and crowded, and there's always something to look at, even in the most remote locations. Attention to detail is the name of the game here, and in a game with so many locations, characters, and items, this level of detail is just
amazing.
For me, Divinity Original Sin 2 is hands down the best amongst its modern day peers in this regards. Performance and stability, it's not great. While many of the issues have been fixed with patches, many more persist even to this day, and no amount of fiddling around with the options got them sorted out. I experienced several crashes, and I also had to wrestle with some 1990s Sierra-like game design decisions. Like, you can progress into the next stages of the game even if you don't have this item that you're 100% going to need later on. There's even videos titled "Things That I Wish I Had Known Before Playing Divinity Original Sin 2. And I would say check those out to spare yourself further ball bashing. But this is yet another category in which the ball busting makes an appearance. Other considerations and final thoughts. I know that for some of you there is no way that any game is ever going to surpass your classic favorites like Baldur's Gate 2 and Icewind Dale II, and I understand. Not only were these games ahead of their time in many respects, but you also played them at a time in which you didn't have too many previous experiences with games like this to water down the impact, so they blew you away. They blew me away. but Divinity Original Sin 2 does elevate the combat, the exploration, and the level design to new heights. This is something like I had not seen before ever, and in many respects, it is even better than our beloved classics. It won't take Arcanum's place or Baldur's Gate 2's place, make no mistake about it. There's a lot more to those games than combat and level design. And to be fair, these games succeeded in ways that Divinity Original Sin 2 didn't. There's the myriad of branching paths with multiple relevant decision nodes in Divinity Original Sin 2 as there are in Baldur's Gate 2 or Arcanum. The adventure feeling of a long journey filled with peril that you got in games like Icewind Dale 2 or Baldur's Gate 2 has been replaced with shorter, more linear, and straightforward quests in Divinity Original Sin 2. And it's not the same. But that doesn't mean this game isn't without its own merits. In fact, it turned out to be a very pleasant surprise. This game of course has nothing to do with D&D lore, but if you want to know what Larian Studios is capable of, or if you simply want to pick up a medieval fantasy CRPG with a fresh take on most things, and don't mind the occasional punch in the balls, then this is the one for you.
And I have nothing more to say to you.
If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you're seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.